Welcome to the Soul Mamas podcast with your host, Nicole De Leon. This weekly podcast is designed for adventurous mamas, business owners, creative visionaries, athletes, and ocean lovers, to name a few, living strong, independent lives while negotiating their role as mom. As a longtime surfer of 25 years who is now a new mama, I will speak candidly about the trials and tribulations of being a new mom without giving up the sport and lifestyle I so adore. Along with stories from my own life, I will be joined by guests who are raising or who have raised children while maintaining passionate, mindful living. The Soul Mamas podcast is a safe and non-judgmental space for those of us who don't define ourselves by societal conventions, but by our desire to pave our own way in order to inspire our children to do the same. When I think personally of women's big wave surfing, I immediately think of today's guest, Sarah Gerhardt. She is in Northern California. She's one of the most courageous Mavericks surfers, women surfers. And when I was a teenager, just learning to surf myself, I remember her vividly pushing the limits for women surfing, one of the scariest, coldest, most daunting waves really on earth. And she's not only dominated one of the biggest, most difficult waves, to surf in the world, but she's also a mama of two, a 14 and a 16-year-old, and she's a professor of chemistry. So this mama is both accomplished on a physical and intellectual level, and she uses her focus and analytical brain to master all that she sets her sights on. I really find this interesting about Sarah, and she's also studied Mavericks at length, particularly before paddling out and dropping in on a wave herself. So it's fascinating to me as a surfer just to hear her progression, just how she actually went from watching her husband, charge Mavericks to paddling into her own waves. And, she admits that her husband, Mike, is one of her greatest inspirations and favorite surfer to watch out there. In 1998, she paddled out into the channel, and she actually started to catch a few of her own waves around that time. And she admits that it was super terrifying, but that knowing your surroundings and having good equipment, especially clocking in the hours, just studying the wave, helped her to keep her feeling safer in these treacherous conditions and environments. So Sarah is not someone she did not have it easy growing up, and she did experience homelessness, poverty, and she appreciates all that she has accomplished. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how she learned from her tough upbringing and how that's made her who she is today, just how it has informed her parenting, and how big wave surfing affected her parenting and what it's like to face our biggest fear. So it's really a super honor for me to have her on the show today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for the introduction.
You're most welcome. And just what you were telling me in our little pre-interview chat is, you got to get out there today in the morning. What's your schedule looking like now that you have teenagers? Has it changed a lot in terms of when you get to surf and take time to yourself?
Well, that's a really great question. I've certainly had to be more flexible over the past 16 years, almost 17 years. Before children, I used to say BC. My husband and I just we're very self-centered, and we had our career goals, and we love to surf and work out kind of whenever we wanted to around work. And
Mm-hmm.
then when we had our son, it was quite the shock to have not just the whole, the caring for another individual, but to have my heart so deeply enamored and just tightly bound to the well-being of my son, right? So I had my son first, and then he wasn't even a year old yet, and I had just gotten back into the water. My husband was in the Maverick surf contest, so I was in the channel that day and watched him. And then I got some of the biggest waves that I had ridden up to that point that afternoon. And it turned out I was pregnant with my daughter at that point, and I didn't
Oh,
know.
wow. Oh my
So
God.
I know. So I look at her today and I go, "Yeah, you really had it rough in utero. Hope you had enough oxygen in there." Um, and it's so funny. I loved just the joy of my son, and I told my husband, "Oh, I want to have another child." And he's like, "Are you kidding? You'll never surf again." I was like, "I don't care." So the reality is, yeah, it became a lot more time restricted. So I learned to be flexible, and then also more focused. I plan my day with a lot of flexibility around maybe I get a call from school, or, maybe one of my kids isn't feeling well. I can't
Mhm.
just get up in the morning and have an expectation that I will be able to go surf at such and such a time. It's sort of like,
Mhm.
well, today, maybe I'm going to surf around in the morning, or I'm going to surf in the afternoon.
Mhm.
I do still get up very early so that I can have time to get centered. And
Mhm.
I learned that when my kids were little, that I would get up at like 4 or 5 and just spend that time getting centered, so that no matter what happened, opportunities came my way, whether it was to surf or to deal with a crisis, that I could deal with it with grace. And so, yeah, my kids are older, but I still carry the kind of, I don't know, lessons I learned from when they were younger. And it's good. I'm just still
Mhm.
tired a lot.
Mhm. You're once a parent, always a parent, even in the, in the teenage years, especially. I'd like to compare it to new motherhood. Can you tell us, if you can just think back to the new stages of motherhood, some of those kind of shocking or jarring self-identity kind of switches, like where you go, wait, this is how I used to live my life versus this is how I live my life now. Was it hard for you to kind of, step into motherhood, or did you find it was seamless, or a little bit of both?
I would say I really had no clue initially. People were asking me, like, oh, would you ever surf Mavericks again, once I was pregnant? And I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. One of the things that I found is that my desires to live, to and experience the wildness of nature, whether it's to go hiking or surfing big waves, that desire, it never left.
Mhm.
And my priorities instead changed, and my priorities became around my family. And so there was, and still is, a lot of tug between a desire to go out and just kind of be free in the crazy ocean or something like that, and then the responsibility, the desire, I guess, that I have for the well-being for my family. And those
Mhm.
are at odds with each other quite a bit,
Mhm.
actually. And I don't know that I was completely unprepared for that, partly because I was studying a very difficult chemistry. It's called physical chemistry,
Yeah.
and it took all of my mental energy and physical energy as well in my PhD program. So I'd been trained to exist with competing desires, right?
Right.
I wasn't going to get my PhD done and spend all day surfing. I couldn't do both, right? I had to be very focused about, okay, I'm going to surf in the morning and then I'm going to go to work for 12 hours. And so because of that, I think it helped me to transition to parenthood because of the, I guess, competing desires.
Mhm.
However, I have to say, I really didn't step into a deeper emotional experience of motherhood until my kids were older, which is kind of weird. But I think it has to do with the fact that I lost my mom when I was younger,
Mhm.
and that I didn't really know my dad
Mhm.
because he was a sailor and my parents got divorced when I was young.
Right.
And my role as a child was actually to care for my mom. So my older sister, she's 5 years older, and I cared for her because she had muscular dystrophy.
Right.
So I didn't really have the experience of a child with a parent who could care. My mom
Yeah.
cared deeply. She was emotionally there for us. She was a counselor. She was amazing, but physically, she was quadriplegic. So, I didn't have that kind of experience of what it would be like to be a child and have a parent care for me. So
Right.
my caring for my kids was very much around provide for them all of the physical things, like food
Mhm.
and a clean home, and you know being there for them, picking them up from
Mhm.
school and taking, like, that kind of stuff was more, I think, of what I was focused on. um and then I think my son was about 10 when I went, oh my God, I've got children. And
Mhm.
I wanted to meet them in a different way,
Right.
in a way that was um, just to slow down and find out, like, what's important to you, and what what do you need? Like, I think I know what I wanted as a kid, and I'm trying to give that to you, but maybe that's not what you want. Maybe that's not what you need. So, uh, back to your question, was it a seamless transition? Yes and no, right? Um, was it, is it different now? Yes and no. I mean,
Right.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It's actually so multifaceted. I want to even take a step back. I think that was beautifully said. I want to take a step back into, you starting to get into big wave surfing because I'm assuming that not having it easy growing up kind of propelled you to push yourself further. Because it was like you had less to lose. Would I be wrong in making that assumption?
Yeah, I think definitely having the challenges that I had when I was younger taught me to be really scrappy.
Hmm.
And then also, I never really belonged in the normal social circles that a lot of people get to belong to, like
Right.
having friends and having family friends and that kind of stuff. We
Yeah.
moved around a lot. My parents were hippies, and yeah, we did have periods of homelessness. And a particularly challenging one was between my middle school and high school
Hmm.
summer. We had been evicted and we didn't have a place to live. So we spent my mom and I, at this point it was just my mom and I, spent the summer camping, and she was looking for work in the Bay Area. And come August, mid-August, we still didn't know where we were going to live. We didn't have a place to live. She didn't have a job. So she came back to San Luis Obispo, where she'd gone to school at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo,
Hmm.
and looked for employment with the county drug and alcohol, which was where she had done her internship
Okay.
for her marriage. It's called an MFT now, which is marriage and family therapy.
Yeah.
At that point, it was MFCC. So she and they hired her. So we had to find a place to live, and we looked everywhere, and it was very difficult to find something that would fit our budget.
Hmm.
And when we finally did, the house wasn't ready. So it was a little apartment, and we had to live in a Motel 6 for the first month and a half of my life. And then we weren't really in that place. We're in this other transitional place in my life in high school, right? And I went to a new school. So we didn't move back to where I knew anybody at all. And so it was Pismo Beach. And the cool thing was I was close to the beach. And what I think the thing in terms of like challenge, and detours in my life, it directed me into surfing because I
Hmm.
lived a house away from the beach and I just got to play all the time. And I didn't have people around me who were that I knew who were saying like, "Hey, you can't do this or you can't do that." I wasn't like, but I wasn't included either. So it was kind of an interesting place to be, and I just found that I loved when the ocean was wild. And I think part of that is because I was able to just let all of the hard stuff fall away
Hmm.
and be focused on the present moment.
Right.
I think, especially as moms, I know in my mind, I'm constantly thinking about all the logistics, right? A friend of
Hmm.
mine she was thinking about logistics and stuff when we were at a party, and she's like, I'm the DOFA, which is Director of Family Affairs. And I love it. And it's like,
Hmm.
I am too, and so I'm thinking about food and laundry and
Hmm.
where are kids staying or going and who's coming to our house. And then I also work, right? I'm working full time. And
Hmm.
I find that I can go out surfing and, you know, I'll start thinking about stuff and I get distracted away from the incredible majesty and magic of being in the ocean. And except when it's really big. So the bigger it is, the more focused and
Yeah.
more alive and more present and connected my experience is. And I want that.
Hmm.
So in part, I think the challenges that I had directed me in the path of surfing bigger waves and taking bigger risks. And another thing that I discovered is that as soon as I was good enough to actually surf, go down the line and compete with the guys, they didn't like it. And I did have a lot of, people around me that were telling me like, you should get out of here. You don't belong here. And what I found is that when the surf was bigger, at least half of those guys were on the beach and I could go out and they weren't around.
Mhm.
And so I found, and then I found friends, like people who surf big waves who took me in um, just one of them, one of the boys, and actually married one, Mike, my husband. And so I found camaraderie out in bigger surf. I found a greater connection with just how incredible the ocean is and the power of the surf, and I liked it. So that's why I went out.
It's so interesting to me, just the trajectory that led to that moment. It was like all the stars aligned, you know. I think your personality really lends itself to that, and not a lot of people
Hmm.
do. I think that's why, you're a rarity. And what I really found fascinating reading about you is kind of the process leading up to paddling out, and just how you didn't just, it would have been dangerous for you and for everyone to just kind of, be blasé and just paddle out without knowing your surroundings. But you really took the time and spent the hours to analyze it, even to the point where other people around you took note of that. Can you tell us, because we have a lot of surfers and a lot of athletes on this show as listeners, just kind of the process of sitting in the channel and then starting to paddle out, and your first emotions kind of as a response to seeing this crazy giant wave?
Yeah, sure. So let's see, just to back up a little bit, I was in college and I went to Cal Poly SLO in chemistry, and I'd been surfing for about 5 or 6 years at that point, which in the scheme of things isn't a very long time.
Mm-mm.
But I'd already gone to the North Shore of Oahu. I'd done my first big trip and experienced the power of Sunset Beach and bigger waves, and I wanted that. And that winter was an El Nino winter, and I started experiencing uh, and surfing breaks that didn't normally break, and really, really getting my butt kicked. But at the same time, like going, "Ooh, I want to do that again."
Mhm.
I did actually have quite a neck injury that winter, and it kept me out of the water for a while. And then I saw a surfer magazine with Jay Moriarty on the cover.
Mhm.
And I heard about Mark Fu's death, and people started talking to me about Mavericks and like,
Mhm.
what do you think about this place? I'm like, I don't know. I hadn't heard of it. Like
Mhm.
nobody had heard of it, right? And that winter really dropped a little seed in my mind, and I kept looking at those waves, and I had a poster and I was like, ooh, I want to surf that. I want to surf that. So I'd been thinking about it for probably at least 5 years before I actually went out and surfed it. I started making a lot of trips to the North Shore of Oahu, and I connected with a shaper who started making guns for me to surf bigger waves. And I started training with friends that I made on the North Shore of Oahu. And the cool thing is, one of them was Ken Bradshaw, so a famous big wave surfer,
Mhm.
and all the people that lived at his house who also like to surf big waves. When it was flat, we trained. We ran the beach, we worked out. Our friend Porter, who lived across the street, had like a little outside gym. So we, basically pump iron. My husband, who was just a friend at that time, introduced me to mountain biking. When it was really calm, we would do breath hold training through the lava tubes. We were like the original crew to carry rocks under the water, right? This is like before all the hype and stuff.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just figured out like, oh, this is fun. Yeah, who can stand on the longest? Well, you got to hold a rock because we didn't have weight belts, right? And so we did all of that, and I fell in with a group of people who were passionate about life and living in their body and pushing, right? So I had that experience and that training, and I liked it, and I was doing that for at least 4 or 5 years before surfing Mavericks. And I surfed outer reefs. I think I was probably the first woman to tow in on outer reef on Oahu, because nobody towed in at that time.
Mhm.
And Ken was towing in with one of his tow partners, Dan Moore, and I paddled out, and he towed me into a wave at outside log cabins,
Mm-hmm.
outside alligators actually. And then I was, I graduated from Cal Poly SLO and was looking at grad schools. And all that time I wanted to surf Mavericks. It was like in my mind. I was like, I want to surf there. I want to surf there. And I had graduated in December because I took time off of school after my mom died. So I was a little off sequence. And I had this old rust bucket that filled with water that was yellow that I called the Yellow Submarine. And it was an El Nino winter and it was filled with water. And I drove up the coast looking for Mavericks. I didn't know where it was. And I had the number of a couple of people who surfed. Richard Schmidt, I called him and talked to him, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know." He was really cool, actually. I saw him in the water yesterday. He still is cool, but he was like, "I don't know if I have a board you can borrow." Like, who are you?
Right.
So I was contemplating whether I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, I didn't want to just be in a lab all the time. And I knew that that's what the PhD program in chemistry would be. I knew I wanted to help people. So I thought, well, maybe medical school. And then I knew I wanted to surf. And I'm like, well, how am I going to go to medical school if I'm, I haven't taken the MCAT and I haven't, and it's just all these questions. And all along the way, I'm analyzing the coast. I'm analyzing the swell. I learned how to read the old weather maps. Like, this is before you had anything else. And I read the weather maps that the sailors used. I knew how to listen to the weather radio, and I was plotting how I would get there. And the cool thing is I was accepted to UC Santa Cruz and decided to go there for grad school. And I just okay, I'm going to move to Santa Cruz and I'm going to surf Mavericks. So I'm going to do the PhD program and I'm going to surf Mavericks. And so I kept just like training. I moved back to Oahu for the 9 months before school started. I surfed and trained hard with all my friends. And Mike and I got married during that time. And he came to California with me, and he was really good friends with Jay Moriarty.
Yeah.
So right after we moved here, I became completely immersed in the PhD program, which was taking everything. Especially since I'd had 9 months off of school. It was like, whoa, I got to remember all that stuff I learned like a year ago. But we were working out every day, and I wasn't mentally prepared for it. Probably physically I would have been okay, but I wasn't mentally prepared for it. It was our first paddle out. I like to be quiet and contemplative and kind of, find my Zen space. And I was in the back of a pickup truck with Mike and Jay in the front, and they were blasting Metallica. And I was nauseated from the adrenaline and couldn't, I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing? I had a borrowed board that was too big for me, but I hadn't ever been on a 10-foot board. I rode, I think a 9.6 was the biggest I'd ridden on Oahu. Right. And everyone was riding 10.4s, 10.8s. And so I had borrowed a 10.8. When I arrived, it was so cold. I wasn't prepared for that. It was much colder than Santa Cruz and certainly colder than Oahu. And it was loud and it was high tide and the current was nuts. And I got so slapped around on the paddle out and felt pretty weak, even though I'd been focused on working out, it wasn't like at that level I needed because I was focused in school. And so I was like, on the inside, I was like, I'm finally here and I'm not ready. Like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to surf it. It's much gnarlier than I thought it was going to be. I mean, the pictures do not do it justice. Right. Because of the way that the wave sucks below sea level. It never looks as big as it actually is. And it doesn't catch the fact that there's a ledge. You can see it if you watch enough videos, but there's this ledge that comes up the face as you drop in and pretty much go airborne over it. You're like dropping in, you think you're good, and then you just go over this ledge, and a lot of people fall right there.
Yeah.
Or, that maybe kind of the boards at the time, the technology wasn't quite as good. And so you'd see a lot of people dropping in and then not making it around and just getting blasted and sent through the rocks. Right. So I was observing all that and I'm like, I was kind of heartbroken. I was stoked to be there, but I just sat in the channel and was like, oh, I guess I'm not going to surf here after all. And, but I watched Mike and I watched Jay and I watched all the guys surf and was like, okay, well, I made it out there. I'm going to come back. And I did. I went back again, another swell on a different board that was smaller, not quite the right fit for me. And and I was looking at it, right? I was like, okay, where's the lineup? Where's a safe spot? Where, like, basically everything, right? And I always recommend that people, you got to have an exit strategy too. I don't know
Yeah.
how many times people paddle up to me and go, how do you get out of the water? I'm like, wait, you got in without an exit strategy?
Oh my God.
You guys, you
Oh
have to
my
have an
gosh.
exit strategy. You need to know how to get out of the
Yeah.
water. Um,
Yeah.
so, I was lining everything up. I'm like, okay, well, what happens if you get washed over here? What happens if that happens? And kind of reading it, right?
Hmm.
And all that led to, yeah, Frosty. I met Frosty in the water and he drove home and talked to Bob Pearson on the way home. And he was basically
Hmm.
like, I think I just saw the first woman to surf Mavericks in the water.
Oh,
And I was
wow.
encouraged to call Bob to get a board and I got a board. And so the next time I went in the water, I had a board shaped just for me. And it was just a really beautiful day, much easier to paddle out and didn't get slapped around and I was ready for it. And I got waves. And yeah, so that's kind of like, I guess, the progression. And I think all of the years of training paid off. And there's still a lot of training to do. Always learning
Wow,
and growing.
yes, it's incredible. I mean, what role does mindset play? Like in terms of like, as humans, we have that natural, like coping, like survival mechanism to be fearful. Do you almost have to fight against that? Do you think it takes a special, kind of person or a different type of thinker to actually face your fears so readily?
Well, mindset's really important. And it's actually probably more important than physical strength because
Right.
right, so we all have fear and fear is good. I think. I mean, I think fear can be a very important and useful emotion that shouldn't be ignored, right? Fear is a thing that keeps us alive. Yes, it can
Mhm.
prevent us from doing the things that we want to do. If we get a fear response, like I always tell my students when they sit down to take an exam and they're like, I forgot everything. I'm like, yes, because your brain can't tell the difference between a lion and an exam. And you just went fight or flight and everything shut down and you couldn't think straight because you were supposed to run away from the lion. Like, okay, wait, let's talk about the mind, right? So I've actually done a lot of work around mindset. And again, I want to start with the basis that fear is important and it is useful. And we have to use proper risk assessment, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like it's so funny. I love to do open water swimming, and there was a swim from the Mile Buoy, which is actually 2.5 miles off of Santa Cruz to the beach, and I was like, oh, I told my husband, oh, I want to do that swim. He goes, Sarah, that is unnecessary risk. I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're right. I'll paddle for it. I'll be an escort, right? Like, I mean, there's unnecessary risk, right? And then
Yeah.
there's also times where you're like, okay, it's a job interview, or maybe you snowboard, or maybe you're an athlete, or maybe you're trying something new for the first time, right? And there's all this stuff that our mind wants to bring up to protect us, but
Mhm.
unfortunately some of that's just junk. Some of that's
Yeah.
just anxiety around, oh, what's going to happen if, or what will people think if? And we have to sit down and go, well, get like, for me, it's very important to be clear, like, why do I want to go surf
Why?
Mavericks? Why do I want this? And if it comes down to because I'm trying to impress somebody else, that's
Right.
unnecessary risk. I don't need to be
Right.
involved in trying to impress somebody else. If
Right.
if I'm going after something because my heart is after it, and I'm not gonna, hurt somebody else or hurt myself in a way that's irreparable, then I'm gonna go
Right.
after it. You know? So yeah, like again, when I talk to my students, I'm because a lot of every year I've got people that are like, oh my God, I've got test anxiety. I'm like, yeah, I know. I have anxiety.
Mhm.
It's an issue that I have had to deal with my whole life. And so I've done a lot of
Mhm.
counseling around it. And I've just found that there
Mhm.
are multiple ways to deal with it. And
Yeah.
one of those ways to deal with it is to deal with the physical stuff, right? And that is getting enough sleep, eating well, making sure you're working your cortisol out. Like I read the book Spark, which is really great, and how exercise helps with our neurochemistry. And
It does.
so,
Absolutely.
yeah, so surfing actually happens to be a way that I deal with anxiety, right? And
Mhm.
anxiety and
Mhm.
fear, they're not exactly the same thing, but they can become, anxiety can become fear and become overwhelming when it's unchecked and unregulated. And then there's the mental stuff, right? So, like for instance, if I'm getting worked, or if I know I see a set outside, I know I'm going to get caught inside, I start talking to myself and I tell myself, hey, you're going to be all right, to keep myself from going into, like I would say, flight. So, fear produces fight as well. Fear can produce this incredible strength. You hear about people lifting cars up, right?
Yeah.
And doing all these crazy things. Well, that's because they have adrenaline and it's being used to produce strength. So you can be paralyzed by it, or you can be strengthened by it. And again, for me, it comes down to, what's my motivation? And I do that work before I enter the water. I don't
Yeah.
try to figure it out in the water, because in the water, it's all adrenaline. And so the I think your question too is about, is it just take a particular kind of person? I think maybe that's true. I've definitely learned a lot about neurobiology, and we are all so unique and different, and that is beautiful. And that diversity brings this life into 3D and beautiful color. Not
Yeah.
everybody needs to go, jump off a cliff or
Right.
or surf the biggest
Mhm.
waves. That is fine,
Yeah.
and for those people who maybe, their prefrontal cortex is slightly larger, or maybe they have
Yeah.
ADHD, like I have ADHD, I thrive when I'm getting like pinged from all different directions. That's when I come into
Yeah.
focus. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
tend to find myself distracted, and I don't know, it just doesn't work as well for me. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yes, definitely. There are people who are unique in the way that they live their life on like more adrenaline and more edge. And for those people who don't, but who want to do that and maybe challenge themselves, you know, again, there's the physical aspect of dealing with anxiety and fear, and the mental one. And the mental one is every bit significant as the physical component. So, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And like I said before, I mean, it's really multifaceted and a lot comes up listening to you speak, but I can relate in terms of like the anxiety or the level of intensity that I need to release from my psyche and my daughter as well. And she's only 4. I almost feel like if we can't harness it in a positive or passion driven way, it can be harnessed towards anxiety, and so it's almost like we have to get it out of our system, when we have this intensity inside of us. And it took me until adulthood, just personally, to realize that, that's why I was so prone to wanting to get out in the water. I mean, I'm not a big wave surfer, but just for me, it's intense exercise, like sweating. I'm the only one like enjoying it usually. Like, I need to get this out of my body. And so I really want to push myself when it comes, and I'm learning just as a mother, I really need that, and once I have that, and especially in the morning, get it out of your system. It's like a dream recipe for anxiety and intensity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the challenges that came throughout this whole process of my life was in terms of surfing, is that I didn't realize that I was just designed for that. And I spent so much time feeling guilty about leaving certain things undone and prioritizing surfing. But the reality is, having intense exercise for me personally. And then also I have, I do yoga once a week. So I do some calm stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
having that part of my daily experience makes me a higher functioning human being. I have a
Yeah.
whole lot more patience and love to give to other people and to myself. And, I spent a lot of time feeling guilty because I wasn't at home doing this or that. And now I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? If I want to be a nice, loving, kind human being to myself and other people, which I do want to be that, then I'm going to go take care of this. And I'm going to take care of my body and I'm going to take care of my mind. And it's 45 minutes or an hour out of a
Right.
17 to 18-hour day that I spend giving to everybody else. And so I'm okay with
Yes.
that. And I used to feel
Yes.
guilty. Now I'm like, yeah, no, flag in the ground. I'm doing it. I'll be back and you guys are going to be fine.
I love that. That's actually really important and apropos to our mama listeners because guilt comes up a lot, and particularly for women athletes and women surfers. I mean, we have to be self-motivated, for to a certain extent. It's a self-involved sport, and it's always that play and pull between, giving to others and giving to ourselves, and I love that you're saying, give yourself the green light to go, and then we can help everybody else out. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but we really do have to fill up our cup in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. My friend was telling me the other day, she's like, put your mask on first. It's COVID. I was like, wait, what? And then she texts back, she goes, your oxygen mask. I'm like, right. There's a
Right.
reason that if you're traveling with small children, you as a parent must put your oxygen mask on first so you don't pass out
Yes.
trying to get it on your kid. Right?
Yes. Yes.
It's like,
Exactly.
yeah, and I know it's hard to not feel guilty, and again, guilt is a
Mhm.
one of those emotions that doesn't have to always be negative. Like fear isn't always
Right.
negative. It can propel us to do the right thing around our
Mhm.
social environment. It can propel us to take care of other people, but it becomes a bad thing when we don't take care of ourselves. And it's
Yeah.
always going to be there and it's always going to be ready to jump all over me or whoever, right? To say, like, oh, you should, you could, you woulda. And instead, you're like, no, I am making a choice to take care of myself. And that's it.
Mhm.
And just shut up. I'm going to go take care of myself. And then guess what? I'm going to take care of everybody else. So,
Right. Right. I love that. I love that. And it just makes me think, like, did you cop, and as we're winding down here, did you cop any flack like from people, just societally about surfing big waves and being a mother?
not really, but definitely my poor mother-in-law. Oh God. So Mike's mom moved in with us before we had kids. Her mom had recently passed away and Mike and I had just bought our first house and we weren't intending on having kids. So we had a room in our
Mhm.
house and we said, come on, you got to come live with us and we'll take care of you. And so she moved in with us. And then about within a year, I was pregnant. And so Mike, furiously with his brother built a little granny unit in the back.
Mhm.
And she's lived with us ever since. So there were times when Mike and I would surf Mavericks together. So obviously, after having kids, those times became fewer and fewer. He would usually go, or I would go. We do the split shift. But there were times we'd go together, and I would look at Mike's mom, and she was just like, "You guys had better bleepity bleep 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 come back in one piece." As we're leaving, like two little kids, like, "Here you go,
Yeah.
Jeech."
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't really catch any flack. Interestingly, this year's the first year that I didn't paddle out after 22 years of surfing up there.
Oh,
And
wow.
it really came down to the fact that I was felt so much responsibility for my family. I mean, I'm the one with
Yeah.
the health insurance. I was teaching full time. My husband had shoulder surgery. And I was just like, you know what? If I got a traumatic brain injury, there's nobody to take care of me right now. I couldn't do
Mhm.
it. So I, for the first time, stood down this year. And there were plenty of opportunities for me to go. It was pumping. And instead, I was like, no, you know what? I'm going to go surf triple overhead in Santa Cruz. And I'm going to take this
Mhm.
board and I'm going to just take it down because, again, unnecessary risk. If I was hurt this winter,
Yeah.
my husband was like one-arm bandit, and my kids were just festering at home and homeschool and COVID and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And I was like, no. So, I definitely kind of did a little about face this year for the well-being of my family, but I still have my Mavericks
Yeah.
gun. There's always next year,
Yeah.
maybe. I want to
It's
know.
still staring at you from across the room or in your garage. You know
Yep.
it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down, because I know you're gonna go get some food for your teenager,
Yes.
and it's the life of a mom always, right? I wanted to ask you just what being a soul mama means to you.
Wow. Well, I think it means being willing to be aware, right, of what's going on inside my heart, my mind, my spirit, my body, to embrace the desires and the hopes and dreams, and then to live open handed. To instead of like, when you close your hand and the sand just squeezes through the fingers, but if you live open handed, it means that I'm going to be flexible and I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to be faithful um, to God and to the love around me and to the life that I can live. Yeah, that's it.
I think that's a beautiful summary of just everything that you said, and just I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and self-reflectiveness. And I know that you have a lot going on, and our listeners and myself are just so honored to have you on. I know you're not a social media woman, or
I
maybe you
know.
are now,
I'm
but
not. I keep saying like, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. You know what? I'll let you know if I eventually get back on something. I just want to go surf. That's the problem. I'm like, social media or go surfing? Definitely go surfing every time.
I think that's a good choice. Well, how about this? Could you give our mamas like somewhere like where they can maybe see footage of you, or somewhere that they can look like a blast from the past?
Yeah, let's see. Well, maybe I could post. Let's see. I did a blog or a podcast with Outside Magazine, and then I wrote something for the Outdoor Project. I think that's what it's called. And yeah, there's a new book out that a really amazing writer, Bonnie Suey from San Francisco, just wrote. It's called Sarah and the Big Wave. And
Mhm.
it just came out. It's a kid's book, and I'm just so pleased with how it turned out. The artist was amazing. Um, so I'm thinking, I don't know, I might start posting something. I just got to figure it out. I don't know.
Oh.
Is it going to take away from time in the water? I don't know.
You have chosen wisely. I would choose the same thing. Oh, well, like I said before, it's a super honor, and I hope you get out there this next winter. And I think that you chose wisely for your family. COVID was a really particularly hard time, so it's wonderful to hear your trajectory and your story. And thanks again for being on.
Well, thank you so much for having me and just being patient with me as we, had to, I don't know, we tried to get this together, started a year ago or something like that, a long time ago. And I just really,
I love it.
yeah, thank you for taking the time to interview too. And hopefully people are blessed and inspired and get out there and have some fun.
Oh, likewise, Mama. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great. Thanks. Bye.
That wraps up this episode of the Soul Mamas podcast. If you like this episode and think someone else would, please share it. Check us out weekly and every week for future episodes where I interview a variety of soul mamas who talk about topics like launching businesses, training for athletic pursuits, and nurturing creative ventures with their little ones in tow. Some weeks I will be sharing the uncensored reality of my own personal journey into motherhood, which includes the ups and the downs. If you'd like to join the Soul Mamas tribe, or for show notes and latest news, go to www.soulmamas.com to check out more. You can find us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you find your podcasts. And if you like more episodes downloaded every week straight to your device, hit subscribe. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to rate and review it so we can reach more mamas. Thanks again for listening.